Well, that leaves Center Campion to lead us. Okay. Oh, darn. Saved by the bell. Okay. Good morning. It is Wednesday, March 9th, 8:37 a.m. And this is a meeting of Senate Natural Resources and Energy. We're here to resume work on S-284, an act relating to weatherization. And one of the principal tasks for us before voting this bill out is adding language around investments we'd like to make for the coming year, and in some cases beyond, in terms of supporting the work of S-284, in particular, the workforce pieces that have been discussed through a couple different work groups. And we have a worksheet in which we've taken testimony in previous meetings.
Mr. Chair, just to make sure we're going live, does it make sure to hit got it just so that we are all okay, great, thank you.
See that online, okay. So I don't know where that's coming from.
Okay, sometimes it has to be confirmed. I know.
It's live.
Great.
Trust me.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So thank you all for coming in, and I'd like to get started.
You want to pass the floor to Dick for a moment? Dick McCormick.
Yes. Before we get going, Senator McCormick wanted to make an announcement. So, Senator McCormick, you want to do that, and then we'll get started on the.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to be keeping my camera off because I have a detached retina that requires that I sit face down for 40 minutes out of every hour, and there's no point of being on camera. But when I see people with the camera off, I wonder if they're actually there. So I want people to know I actually am here and participating. Thank you for the time.
I don't believe it. Okay. Well, thanks for letting everyone know, and we hope you heal well and fast. So with that, I'd like to turn to Deputy Secretary Gendron, and as the first person to help us work through the list. I think the short of it is that we've heard about various, the big picture that we've heard about is an $80 million 4-year investment in weatherization, but that how that money is divvied up into what efforts we're not entirely clear on, and so we want to work through that. And then in addition, we as a committee put out something akin to like a request for proposals and received some maybe you call them pitches a week, 2 weeks ago. And so we wanted to sort through those and reconcile those against the 20 to see if any or all are, well, I'm sure it's not all, if any are covered, and if we're going to be requesting or recommending additional funding beyond the $20 million a year. So that's all right. That's our task today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody, and I look forward to being able to join you in person soon. For the record, my name is Maggie Gendron, Deputy Secretary for the Agency of Natural Resources. I would love to give a special shout out to Jude, who I think works with no less than 13 ANR staff members at any point in time when coordinating schedules for this committee. So I really appreciate her patience as we always figure out who's going to be testifying. So thank you. So I'm going to kick it off, and then I'm really going to turn it over to Sarah because ANR doesn't deploy actual funding for weatherization. But just to set the tone for any Vermonters who might be listening, I know this committee knows this content very well as well. So with me today also, I brought the director of the Global Warming Solutions Act, Jane, who is a tremendous, tremendous amount of wealth in terms of the conversation with the Climate Action Council and all of the work that's been done thus far to respond to the Global Warming Solutions Act. But the Global Warming Solutions Act requires reductions in Vermont's GHG emissions that are tied to 3 time periods, which is 2025, 2030, and 2050. And so as established in the act, it equates to roughly cutting our emissions in half by 2030. And so, as we know, many of Vermont's residential and commercial building spaces are poorly insulated and heated using carbon-intense fossil fuels, with most homes being built before 1975 and a significant portion older than 1939. So it's not surprising to any of us that the building sector is the second highest emitter of greenhouse gases in Vermont, which is second to the transportation industry. And so we're here today to talk about weatherization, which is essential to achieving the requirements of the Global Warming Solutions Act. And the nuance I think that you and I are talking about, Senator Bray, with the committee is weatherization versus the workforce. And weatherization, in ANR's opinion, is essential to achieving that Global Warming Solutions Act requirements. Specifically, the Climate Action Plan estimates that 90,000 homes need to be weatherized between now and 2030, 39,000 of them by 2025 to meet the statutory GHG reduction requirements. And so the $80 million that you referred to, that is the governor's recommendation in ARPA funds, 35 million of that would go to DPS. And you heard from TJ Poor about how those funds would be utilized. And then 45 million to OEO. And we have Sarah here today to present that to you. So those two funds combined is the 80 million of ARPA dollars that we're talking to. They will support weatherization up to 20,000 homes by 2026, these dollars. And these weatherization projects will also be eligible for early action credits as part of the clean heat standard, moderating the financial impact of this significant shift in policy on Vermonters and Vermont fuel suppliers. So it's an important component of the clean heat standard as well. The $80 million also represents work on the ground that we believe we're capable of completing in the ARPA specific time period. And when it comes to workforce specifically, the best solution to workforce issues is establishing a funding stream that gives the private sector certainty to train crews, purchase equipment, knowing that a market will exist to ensure a return on investment. So before I continue, I just wanted to clarify about this table that you provided yesterday. And I am assuming that you are asking for 30 million in addition to the 80 million, or are you asking for that 30 million in your table to modify the 80 million?
That's a perfect question. I don't know the answer. It could be that it's all in addition. And what we don't know is to what degree does the 80 include perhaps investments of the nature that are already in there. For instance, in last year's 20, there was a workforce component. I forget the dollar figure. I think it was like 1.5 million. So I don't know if it's anticipated that we will see a similar allocation out of the 20 again, so I'm thinking of, there was money to VHFA, there was money to Efficiency Vermont, including workforce pieces. So we're not really sure what the 20 supports. And so I think the first question is, what does the 20 support in the next year? And then it would be a question of us vetting these proposals to figure out, do we want to ask for an additional appropriation on top of it?
Okay. I would also then recommend that you are making sure that the request of the 80 million by the governor is ARPA specific. And so I don't know if the list that you provided yesterday is eligible for ARPA. And so that will be an important component. I would say that from the administration's perspective and ANR's perspective, the challenge of diverting any money from the $80 million request is that it will impact our ability to be able to send the clearest possible market signal about the level of investment and commitment from the state to weatherization. And while it's important to invest in the workforce, nobody will argue that, the actual weatherization work is going to contribute to meeting the requirements of the Global Warming Solution Act. And so even with that 80 million of direct investment in weatherization, we're still going to fall short of what the Global Warming Solutions Act demands. And I very much worry about this conversation as peeling off additional dollars from that recommendation to put into workforce development, because I do think it will put us further behind in meeting the requirements that we need to meet through the Global Warming Solutions Act. And Sarah can talk to, I don't want to take too much time away from Sarah, because she and TJ, again, are the ones who are going to be deploying the dollars. ANR is at the table and we work closely with folks, but weatherization doesn't sit in our agency. And so given your answer, I'm going to hold off on the rest of what I had to say, because I think I would just very much caution distracting from what the intent of the $80 million governor recommend is. So I'm going to pause there and let Sarah really dig into the weeds of where the 45 million that would be dedicated to her organization, where that would go.
Okay. So yeah, thanks for, before I go to Senator McDonald, we're not thinking about divvying up money that goes to investments in weatherization in homes. I mean, we've been pushing on this for years, so we're not interested in undermining the investment that we've been struggling to find. You know, it's a blessing to us all that we got this federal money. I think, well, because of the hand in glove nature of supporting the work also entails growing a workforce that's capable of reaching those higher numbers. The 284 has the 90,000 additional homes figure in it. Or my shorthand is doubling and doubling again, the rate at which we're weatherizing. So we know we need to make other investments, and it shouldn't be that we compete for the very same dollars, I think, but we need to be able to have a coherent proposal to send on to approach saying, here's investment at the structural level, and then here's the people on top of it. But we need to reconcile those pieces.
Okay, that makes sense. I thought when I saw the 31 million come across our plate yesterday, I thought you were asking to supplant that, if you will, into the 80 million. So I understand where you're going. I get that. Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. I was not sure.
Yeah, well, thanks for asking, because we need to be crystal clear all the way around we don't want to undermine anybody's work. Chair McDonald?
That was sort of the question that I was asking, that it doesn't matter how much money is in the budget to weatherize homes if you don't have anyone to do the job. You look today at the Ford Motor Company that has hundreds of thousands of people to want to buy Ford F-150s, and they're waiting because they don't have the trained people to build them in the factory to roll them out of. So we put all the money we want in the weatherization, but if we don't have the Army to do the job, we're not moving ahead. So I don't know why we're fighting over where the money is, as opposed to putting together a package that commences actually doing what we say we want to do.
Yeah. So I think to that, Senator McDonald, putting together the package is our job. Okay, with that, so I don't know if you have anything more, Madam Secretary, or if it's Ms. Phillips. Okay. Thanks for coming in again, Ms. Phillips. Good to see you.
Good morning. For the record, I'm Sarah Phillips. I'm the Director of the Office of Economic Opportunity in the Department for Children and Families and the Agency of Human Services. I have a few slides this morning that I'm going to share to walk you through our proposal for $45 million additional investment in ARPA funds to support low-income weatherization. I'll go ahead and share those. Great, I think that's working.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Great. So I was just with your committee a few weeks ago talking about where we've been with the low-income weatherization program, where we are right now, and where we're going. So rather than recap on some of that, I'm just going to cut to the chase in terms of the $45 million proposal. I'm happy to review any of that with you as well. So our proposal is essentially to nearly double the scale of the program by the end of state fiscal year 2026. So folks may remember that last year we weatherized 1,055 units or homes in the state of Vermont. And so this would scale up the program so that at the end of 2026, the size of our program was such that we were weatherizing nearly 2,000 homes annually. So we're in the middle of the scaling up right now based on the added funds that you all appropriated for our program, which includes both the ARPA state fiscal recovery funds or SFR funds, as well as ARPA LIHEAP funds, right? LIHEAP, the low income heating assistance program, received a boost in their block grant that was under ARPA. And so some of those funds, the maximum amount that's allowed for weatherization activities was also appropriated to our program to scale up. So we are in the midst of that scale up right now, and the 80 million would help us continue along that ramp. So you can see sort of our proposal right here. We're front ending as much as we can the scaling up. This also assumes a pretty an inflationary increase in the average cost per unit, which we know is very real right now, both in terms of wages, the need to keep up with the wage market, as well as increase in material costs. So we have factored that into this proposal as well.
Yep. Question on that slide. The 4% in the two outer years, is that because basically we're running out of the 80 million or the 35 or 45, sorry, whatever, I think I have the wrong figure there. Is that we've basically will have spent those ARPA dollars? So it doesn't support.
That's the goal we would front. Right, so there is still a continued growth in the latter years of this 5-year plan, but you're right, we did front load most of the growth in the first couple of years. One reason for that is very strategic, right? It's that, one reason for that is the LIHEAP ARPA investment will end at the end of September 2022. Another reason for that is strategic, so that if we were to fall behind and sort of meeting those early targets, we have some space in the timeline for spending of the ARPA funds to continue to grow the program. It would set us behind in terms of the overall unit targets, but it still creates some space. If we were to sort of evenly grow the program over the 4 years, it's just would not be strategic in terms of our ability both to deploy the funds and grow the program. But also one thing you'll notice in this chart is that we're not scaling down. A lot of times when we've come to you based on your request or request of other committees proposing what it would take to grow the program or what we could do with a certain kind of investment, we oftentimes will show scaling up and scaling down. This proposal doesn't have a scaling down at all, right? Because we recognize that the demands of the Global Warming Solution Act and the Climate Action Plan, as you say, Senator Bray, will require us to double the program and then potentially double again. And so we're counting on the fact that new and additional funds will come in on the back end of this ARPA money so that we're not laying off 125 people in state fiscal year 27, right? So we're scaling up, we're not scaling down.
And can you help us summarize where we are number-wise now? For instance, I think maybe coming into this current year, we were roughly 30,000 homes weatherized. We're aiming for 120 a decade out. Can you remind us of what that 2025 figure was and where what portion of where we want to be in 2025, the OEO program takes us, how far towards that goal?
Yeah, so the goal right now, the target is looking at a 2030 goal of 90,000 additional homes. James,
Right.
if I'm wrong, I'm sure. But I think if you would, the climate action plan doesn't go so far as to say how much of that 90,000 is intended to be our program. But it does recognize that the equity goals of the climate action plan would have us invest heavily in low-income weatherization. And it does also recognize that historically our program has represented about half of the homes weatherized in the state of Vermont. If you were to assume that achieving the 90,000 additional homes weatherized by 2030 was sort of a linear, there's lots of ways to think of how we ramp up to get to that 2030 goal. You might say that by the end of 2026, our program, if we were going to continue to represent about half of weatherization in the state of Vermont, would need to triple in size. We don't believe that we can triple in size by the end of state fiscal year 26. We worked with our agencies very closely to understand how rapidly we could scale up and grow the program. We believe that this is an ambitious target that we're setting with a $45 million ARPA investment, and that we can actually achieve this target. We wouldn't want to come to you today asking for money that we don't think we could deploy rapidly enough. That being said, we also understand that we're going to be asked to do more, and so our proposal doesn't have us ramping down. We're expecting that more money is going to come and that we're going to need to continue to grow to meet demand for the program. But it doesn't go all the way to meet the goals of the Global Warming Solutions Act, and I think that's something that Deputy Secretary Gendron was also mentioning as well. And so that's why this 80 million is really important. It goes a long ways, and it doesn't even go all the way.
And if we were looking at years prior to where we are right now, like the fiscal year 20 and 21 numbers, they're closer to like 900, 1100, doesn't it? So you've been building over where you were. I'm trying to see a little longer time frame to see what it looks like.
Yes, that's true. The legislature appropriated some one-time general funds to our program. Our small portion of funding that comes from the Department of Energy has also been incrementally increasing. We did also have some disruption due to COVID in our work, and so our numbers sort of do a little bit of growth, and so yes, we have been growing, and in fact, last year represented I think about a 20% increase over the prior year. So we have been in a steady growth period. I think that answers your question.
Senator McDonald.
I don't know, 20% growth over a number that you haven't given us. Could you give us the numbers for 2018, 2019, 2020, and 2021 so that we can look at what's on the screen now, which is aspirational, and compare it to what has actually been done so that we have some judgment over what the changes you are proposing represent?
Yes, Senator, thank you. I can certainly come back with, I don't have that slide prepared today. We have presented that information to your committee. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, presented some information. Happy to come back and clearly show the numbers of production in 21. I can say in 21 it was 1,055 units. I think I'm not going to be able to rattle off the numbers off the top of my head, unfortunately, but that was a 20% increase over the prior year in 20. We did have, again, some disruption during COVID, right, where we shut down the program. In 19, I think the numbers were 890 homes, but we can bring that back to you. We also annually submit a report to the legislature that clearly outlines how many units are weatherized, the energy savings, the greenhouse gas reduction, the investment. So happy to pull that information that's out there and bring it back to the committee so you can have that in front of you.
Thank you. Looking forward to seeing it.
And if you, so I understand that in 25, 26, that sort of the lower rate of growth allows you to more easily accommodate if there's a shortfall in 22, 23, 24. But if the legislature were to fund the, not so non-ARPA dollars, but if the legislature were to provide funding in a higher level, can your program continue to develop, in the 15, 18, 24% range? Like how many years out, if you had adequate funding, could you do that? And I'm not, just for reassurance, I suppose. It's not that I'm saying, oh, well, OEO should do all of that work. We've been counting on creating a market that says, oh, there's steady investment at the state level and interest. And so now the private sector will become a bigger, more active player. But for yourselves, is the scaling down because of you're only allocating the money you know is in the pipeline now, but if the legislature were to provide more, you could, in a reasonable, sort of healthy way, continue to grow the programs you have?
So there's no scaling down in this proposal, and we fully appreciate that additional funds are going to come to this program, and we will be asked to continue to scale up, and we are prepared to scale up above what is presented with this, with the 45 million ARPA investment. And so we expect that, and we hope that you all will be working on the funding to support that additional scale up. So yes, we are prepared to do that. I don't have a 10 or 20-year plan to place in front of your committee today. I think, that's ongoing work we need to do with our providers and our network as well. We believe with our network, and let me say, this $45 million investment is widely supported by stakeholders and by our network as the right level of investment for this program through state fiscal year 26. You're recognizing correctly that the last couple years of this represent, on the slide you're looking at, a slower level of growth for the program. This proposal is not without risks. It has real risks in terms of our ability to do this work, as to scale up as quickly as we want to. And so you're seeing that lower level of scale up in the last couple of years, recognizing that there's a risk and that we want to take that into account and give us some room within this proposal to be able to deploy the ARPA funds responsibly, achieve the goals, and also recognize that we just may not be able to grow the workforce another 24% next year on top of the 35% ramp up we're in the middle of this year, right? So we are just going to push as fast as we can to hire up so that we can do more units more quickly. And you're just seeing that's there. Could you add more funds to this proposal? I don't think that's necessary or appropriate. I think that this is the scale up that we think we can do by 2026. Should there be more money coming to this program after 2026 and asking us to continue to scale up? Yes, absolutely. And we are ready to do that.
And then do you have it's not your job, but I know you have a broader interest in the whole weatherization program and what GWSA is envisioning and our targets that are in the action plan. If your projected units through 26 are 8,418 on top of the roughly 30,000 we already have, do you have a ballpark figure that you could share with the committee that says, so in order to be on the right trajectory, this is how many private sector or non-OEO weatherization projects will have to be carried out in the state of Vermont?
Yeah, I think we are one seat at that table of that conversation around how to scale up weatherization. So thank you for recognizing that, Senator Bray. And I'd love to defer to Director Lazarchuk to comment more on the broader plan, if that would be all right.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sarah. Yeah, I had appreciated Jane Lazarchuk, Director of the Global Warming Solutions Act. Thanks for having us in today. And I had raised my hand earlier largely to speak to the work that we did on behalf in support of the Climate Action Plan to have some of those projections at hand. And that's been modified in recent weeks. We have now detailed Vermont Pathways report that is the modeling that projects the targets we're supposed to hit within each sector in order to be on track for not only the 2030 target, but more importantly, in the near term, the 2025 target, which we fully expect we will need to overshoot for the 2025 target to be on the right track for the 2030 target, as it's a much more aggressive emissions reductions requirement. That said, we also appreciate in the building sector in particular, the necessity to scale up, as Sarah's been speaking to. So those numbers have shifted around what the intermediate target is for 2025 versus the target for 2030. That said, we are still, in order to meet the 2025 target, projecting that we need 69,000 homes weatherized. So that is above the 30,000 we have now. So 39,000 additional homes weatherized by 2025 is what the modeling says. Of course, that's a projection, and that is just to keep us on track to get to that total number of new units of 90,000 or 120,000 units total by 2030. So yes, the question becomes, it's not only important to really think about OEO's contribution to this, but how we're going to set the stage and pace that is needed across the larger sector, private sector in Vermont. And that speaks to the money that DPS is requested within the ARPA dollar package as well, and that funding going to support Efficiency Vermont and VAPSA, and that contribution of work as well.
Okay, so thank you, and I'm sorry that when we're in screen sharing mode, we only see the speaker, so I didn't see your hand up, otherwise we would come back. So if I can just double check that math, I thought I heard you saying on the fly, 69,000 additional homes by 2025. And if I look at the chart that on the prior page, it shows roughly an additional 6,500 homes through OEO through 25. So if it's 69,000 minus 30 already done, that's 39,000, take off 6,500. Now we're down to 32,500 additional non-OEO projects to run. I don't know what our actual build rate is in the private sector. Do you have any data on that? Our weatherization rate in the private sector is?
I don't, maybe Sarah can speak to that as well, but my understanding is that there's been roughly a 20% ramp up in the private sector, not dissimilar from OEO's ramp up as well. And so we're not at all on pace right now to hit that target of 39,000 additional homes by 2025.
For the private sector, 20% build up over what base? Do you know, do you have a figure for what they're doing approximately?
I know that efficiency. Oh, sorry, I was just going to jump in there. I know that Efficiency Vermont has that information and could easily put it in front, more easily put it in front of you than we could this morning. And I also know they presented some of that information to House Energy and Technology. I saw their testimony, so might even be easily able to quickly grab that testimony from that committee's page, if that even faster than getting into your committee. So I've seen that information, and I just don't have it off the top of my head.
Okay, thank you. The other thing, Ms. Phillips, you mentioned was risk. So can you tell us a little bit more about what you mean by risk in terms of building out? Like, what are the things you're managing that are risks?
Sure. Yes. Well, I would if it's all right with you, Senator Bray, I would appreciate kind of walking, some of the risk has to do with the other funding. And so I'd appreciate walking your committee through sort of how the full picture of funding comes together to support the scale up, because it's not just the 80 million, and then come back to some of the other risks, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure, of course, thanks.
Great. So what you're looking at here is looking at the revenue sources and then the activities, what we would sort of do with those funds, right? So the amount of funding needed for us to achieve the target goals that we saw that I shared with you on the last slide to nearly double the scale of the program rests on the fact that we would maintain our base level of funding for the home weatherization assistance program. That's the fuel tax revenue, as well as base LIHEAP funding, which represents about $3 million a year from the LIHEAP block grant. It also recognizes that we're going to continue to get our base level of Department of Energy weatherization funding, which would be $8 million. It includes our expenditure and deployment of those LIHEAP ARPA funds that I mentioned, which is 3.9 million. Those funds expire at the end of this September. You all did already appropriate ARPA funds to this program, our state fiscal recovery funds, 4 million. And so it includes that in the thinking as well. And then the 45 million you see recommended additional. We are also anticipating a very large award from the Department of Energy from the infrastructure bill as the national program is scaling up as well. And we do not yet have that award from DOE. We expect to get that award sometime, perhaps late spring or this summer. We do not know the time frame for expending those funds. We anticipate that DOE award will be about 15 million. But until we actually see that award, we won't know what the funding will be. So that is one risk factor for us, is how much DOE funding, what the time frame for spending that DOE funding will be, and what the expectations will be around the DOE funds. And then we also have, in order to scale up the program, our small team at OEO that does weatherization is 3 staff people. And we are are looking to add 3 additional positions to support monitoring and administration of the funds. That's not in the 45 million. That's actually going to come out of AOA's plan for administration of the ARPA funds. So that's sort of the look at where the revenue sources are coming from. Just want to be really clear with the committee that this proposal is doing more than just what we call our core weatherization activities, right? Air sealing and insulation, energy audit, comprehensive home weatherization. It also includes the funding that we spend on OEO administration. It includes the funding we spend on our Hancock Energy software, which supports the day-to-day operations of the program, as well as oversight. It includes investments in new trucks and equipment to start to scale up the program. So we want to be clear about that. And it also includes, as we presented to your committee in the past, our work as a program to be a whole home program that really looks at addressing vermiculite and home repair issues that otherwise defer weatherization. It also includes installation of heat pumps when appropriate for the building and covering the costs of those, as well as the electrical panel upgrades needed to install heat pumps if that's necessary. And it also includes our continued work around efficient wood stove installation. So we factored those pieces into this work as well. So that's part of the investment as well. And just to name specifically, it includes our direct funding of 3 thermal to support multifamily weatherization as well. So a couple, coming back to your question around risk factors, I think one is the DOE funding in particular is a risk factor for us. It's a little bit unknown, but we have pulled together this plan based on some assumptions that we think are fair. Another risk factor is always going to be recruitment. Our program trains staff. Let me be very clear. Our program, if we can hire people, we do the training for staff that's necessary to have them do good work. And we've invested heavily in training, in particular field-based and on-the-job training. The biggest risk factor for us is being able to recruit staff. Last August, we had a 17% crew vacancy. That inhibits our ability to scale up the program and meet the targets in the timeline. I'm really happy to report that as of February, the end of February, we only had a 9% vacancy on crew. 9% vacancy on crew is still substantial, right? It's a little bit slow going in terms of the hiring. You know, we weren't able to just massively ramp up with a drop of a dime. But we're looking forward to continuing to add new crew and other new positions to the workforce in the low-income weatherization program and to support those staff over time. So that is a risk factor for us. I think the other risk factor will be around multifamily weatherization and what is oftentimes referred to as the split incentive, right? Where property owners may not be paying the heating bills. Tenants may be paying the heating bills, and tenants have an incentive and may be eligible for the program, but landlords have to be willing to have their home weatherized, to have the building weatherized. So there's a split incentive there that sometimes just doesn't drive multifamily properties to the marketplace. So I know there's a lot of conversation around how to continue to improve that, but part of our ramp up is continuing to do more multifamily weatherization to reach low income tenants in Vermont. So those would be what I would summarize as the major risk factors.
Okay, thank you. Are you anticipating that IIJA funds will be available to support this work? I mean, no one knows what's going to happen, but to the extent that anyone knows what the infrastructure bills might deliver, including support for workforce, has your department been able to look at all and learn anything helpful around those dollars?
So the DOE funding for the low-income weatherization program nationally did pass as part of the Infrastructure Act. So that would be where we anticipate seeing additional funds for weatherization coming through that massive investment in the low-income weatherization program nationally through the DOE funding. And I'm not aware of other aspects of the Infrastructure Act that would otherwise support, just not my area of expertise, that would otherwise support sort of the holistic work around growing the green jobs economy or green jobs workforce or investing in other aspects of infrastructure. I think that the DOE investment is where that was intended to be made for the largest part.
Okay. And so I'm looking at the current table, DOE infrastructure. Can you explain what kind of investments is that?
So the Department of Energy Low-Income Weatherization Program is the national funding source for weatherization, for low-income weatherization across the country. That represents, annually for us only about 1.6 million of, this year, what is a $16 million program. So it's a small piece of our program, but it also is the backbone of our program in the sense that statute actually tells us to work with in tandem with federal regulations, and we operate the program sort of as a seamless whole. So the DOE infrastructure line that you're seeing here is referring to the added funds that were appropriated by Congress to the Department of Energy Low-Income Weatherization Program in particular. Like under ERA, there was a massive new investment in weatherization nationally in the Low-Income Weatherization Program, and this is a massive investment in the program under the Infrastructure Act. So we anticipate the funding to come to Vermont will be 15 million on top of what is the regular annual appropriation. We got the 15 million figure as Congressman Welch worked his magic to have a conversation. His staff have a conversation with Department of Energy. So it's essentially like a little bird told us that we're getting $15 million. So we didn't pull that number out of nowhere, but we don't have our award and we don't know the time frame for those.
Sounds like a big bird.
A big bird, yes.
And sorry, SFR, can you remind us of what an SFR?
Yeah, SFR stands for State Fiscal Recovery Funds. So it's just to distinguish for us, we have two pots of ARPA funds that we're dealing with in the weatherization program. We have the ARPA funds that are the state fiscal recovery funds. That's the big ARPA funds that is the $80 million recommendation and is what the legislature is appropriating. Under the ARPA Act, though, there were also increases to specific block grants, such as the LIHEAP block grant. And so we refer to those funds as the ARPA LIHEAP funds. They're both ARPA funds. We have to track them separately. So for us, we just need to distinguish them, in this kind of chart.
Okay. And so the very last line item, that's money in support of your 0% deferment, right?
That's right. Our zero deferral policy, right? We don't want to defer any home that's eligible for weatherization due to home repair or vermiculite issues. And so we leverage other funds, and we also invest in just addressing those issues for our program. It also includes what we call add-ons, sort of the weatherization plus. So weatherization plus a heat pump, weatherization plus a stove. So we are very much looking to be a whole home program. When we're in someone's home, that's when it makes sense to also be doing those other investments. And certainly is simpler to have us administer those funds in-house rather than try to package together the deal for a homeowner. So, we do that work. In the past, we've leveraged funds from the Clean Energy Development Fund. We certainly leveraged the electrical efficiency investments through EBT and the LEAP program. And so this just includes some ARPA funds specifically for us to continue work. The heat pump work is fairly new outside of doing that and on occasion through the LEAP program. Heat pumps is new sort of operating practice for us. And so we are in the process of our providers in the process of procuring technicians to do that work. And I believe it's already started as of this month. So.
Thank you. Another thing we talked with you and others about is, starting 6 years ago, Department of Health became a partner in this committee on talking about the benefits of weatherization from a health perspective. And we've discussed it year after year, but the CMS waiver was, I guess it's only revised periodically. And so my impression is that this is the year for revision of the waiver, and that there have been instances, I think maybe down in the Carolinas, I don't know, elsewhere, where CMS authorized weatherization as part of a health expenditure. And I know we've had, I think, a few sort of pilots through Central Vermont Hospital, and I think also up in the Northeast Kingdom and Newport. Do you know if we've made progress on exploring that further with CMS, whether or not they will treat weatherization as a health investment and authorize payments?
I could speak a little bit to that, and then I would say if you want to go deeper, you really should invite the Agency of Human Services Secretary's office, which manages the waiver negotiations with CMS. But I can say that it's not been a part of the waiver negotiations that are currently underway. There is continued work. There is a work group that comes together that includes the Department of Health, our office, DPS, Efficiency Vermont, and others around what we call the Healthy Homes Initiative. Around weatherization. For us, it's as much about weatherization plus health, right? If we are in someone's home, and a little bit of extra investment around railings, for instance, would go a long ways around injury prevention for a household. Let's go ahead and make that additional investment. We don't have the ability to do that right now with the funds in our program based on statutory allowances, but we have participated in pilots in the past, and I think there's a lot of interest in continuing to do that work. The other would be for us a weatherization plus health. If there's someone in the household who has COPD or another asthma, some additional investments. Obviously, weatherization improves the air quality of the home and the home health broadly, but also we could replace carpets, or I think there's other things that could be done in the home that aren't weatherization activities. We call those weatherization plus health, and that's the work that we've been engaging in. So it's not under the CMS waiver negotiation right now, but there is ongoing work around how to think about leveraging weatherization to improve health outcomes. And we are undertaking with the Department of Health a look back study to look at Medicaid data of households who've had their homes weatherized to see if there were changes in Medicaid expenditures based on the weatherization work that was done in their home. So, potentially that's something that next year the Department of Health could come back and speak to the committee more on.
the other question I wanted to ask was, so you have, I think, when of people that we talk with who know what's going on in weatherization, it seems to me like you have one of the most detailed pictures of what's happening out there. And for the bigger picture, so maybe we should, I don't know if you have any other slides or anything more that you want to contribute. I think we also are trying to figure out the bigger frame. Maybe that's why Ms. Wojcik's with us this morning to talk about what else is going on outside of OEL. So and hold my question. Is Ms. Wojcik, is that what you're here to talk to us about?
If I could provide support. Yeah, if I could dive in, I think in terms of this conversation, Senator Bray, and I apologize, I want to correct the record too and take away from using Director Phillips' first name in the beginning, but we do work together quite often in terms of having this conversation about there's no one group that owns this space. And it's, whether we're talking about workforce and we're working with Department of Labor or Department of Education and the various groups in the public sector and private sector that also support the work. I think it's hard to have the conversation in these silos, I guess. So we can do the best we can do, but it's I think there's other people that clearly add to the conversation as well.
Right. And so I think that's, part of what we're trying to sort out here today is that the legislature's not an executive branch, so we're not well suited to executing, but I think we're looking for partners who can hold the whole picture in mind. And, say, so, Senator McDonald has had a number of analogies to like World War II and D-Day. So we had a Supreme Allied Commander in Eisenhower, and I don't know if we have a Supreme Allied Commander yet in the world of weatherization. So I'm not blaming blame or anything. It's just I'm trying to observe and say, what do we need to set up to help us all succeed? And so does that seem true to you? Like, I mean, for instance, Ms. Phillips, you were talking about being siloed, and I get it. That's how we end up. We make allocations that way. We create programs that way. What should we, as the legislature, be thinking about that could be helpful to all you folks who actually do this work, including the private sector, to have a coherent way of achieving those goals, as opposed to knowing that they're really quite aspirational at the moment. And aspiration is great, but we also want to equip everyone to be able to get there. And so can you talk to us, sort of at that high level, how can we be helpful in terms of creating maybe a more cohesive program out there? I suppose one other way I would phrase it is someone has to own a challenge in order to really help drive a solution. And I don't know that so clearly in the OEO realm, we know that Ms. Phillips has taken that on wholeheartedly for years and is really driving the solution there. But it's only one piece of the puzzle. And I don't know who holds the whole job and says, oh, well, that's my task and I'm going to be driving that. So Ms. Wojcik, your hand's up. Thanks.
Yeah. That is a big question. And I think it's the same question asked in the climate space. No one really owns the levers because it crosses so many different agencies, so many different bodies of work. But I defer to the director of the Global Warming Solutions Act.
And I take the floor with the same apology, and thank you, Madam Secretary. I appreciate that. So I do want to say that A&R will have an ongoing role in this space, and I appreciate and would love to hear from Director Phillips around the role of coordination of implementation on the ground. But the role for the Agency of Natural Resources, as spelled out in the Global Warming Solutions Act and as will be carried forward in the Office of Climate Action, will be around coordination around measuring and tracking progress. And there will be a critical role in that space to really understand all of the different programs and levers that we have to pull on with respect to emissions reductions across all of the sectors in order to be on track to hit our 2025 targets and beyond. And that is why I'm here, and Deputy Secretary Gendron is here to help to start to be the catalyst around the coordinating conversation that has already been happening amongst other partners, and ANR starting to figure out our role in thinking about how to coordinate that in order to be able to tell the overarching story of how we're doing and meeting our targets and requirements for the GWSA. And that will be stood up over the course of the next 18 months or so in the Measuring and Tracking Progress database. That Agency of Natural Resources is required by statute to stand up to speak to the progress we're making in the space of the implementation of the Climate Action Plan. What that looks like for weatherization, I think we want to be an active partner in that conversation and think about, and not step on toes, but think about where we can be additive in helping to coordinate the work at that level. But in thinking about implementation, Director Phillips, as well as the PSD, Efficiency Vermont, and others have been on the ground way longer and will continue to be the active partners in the public sector, I believe.
I add to that, if it's all right. I would just say, I think weatherization is, you're right, it's much larger than just OEO. And I'm always reminding you, we're sort of one seat at that table. I don't know that there will ever be one entity that is delivering on something like this. It requires a collaborative infrastructure. And the good news is that I think that we are actually collaborating, and we work very closely with our colleagues at DPS and Efficiency Vermont and others, around weatherization and coordinating and leveraging resources. So I have some confidence in that, but certainly, naming and identifying the need for that ongoing collaborative infrastructure and where that should happen and how it happens. I think the Climate Council is one place where those conversations happen with a broad stakeholder group. There also needs to be good coordination and sort of operational coordination and collaboration between the implementers. And I feel like that actually happens really well. I think on the workforce front, the same can be said, that the workforce the development efforts that folks are putting forward around weatherization need to be well coordinated and part of a comprehensive plan around how we build career pathways and support that work in Vermont. So I think, we've been in conversations with our colleagues at Resource, Vermont Works for Women, VAL, Efficiency Vermont. Yesterday I was on a call with the AGC, Association of General Contractors. Certainly the CTEs are part of that work as well. Vermont Technical College, talking about how those efforts actually come together and are well coordinated. I think perhaps it's a bad analogy, but one way I'm thinking about it is that we have really great, albeit disparate, initiatives around weatherization workforce development in Vermont. All of those sort of niche and different programs, they're really valuable. They're lovely back roads in Vermont. What we really need to build is an on-ramp to a really big superhighway, because that's the kind of scaling up we're talking about. So how those efforts actually come together to be a part of a comprehensive sort of workforce plan, I think that's planning work that needs to happen. And I don't know that we're ready to present sort of what that looks like right now, but those conversations I think are underway, and perhaps next legislative session would be well poised to come back to your committee with some specific proposals. In addition to what's already in the governor's recommend, that kind of dovetails with the need to grow this workforce. So I would put that out there. I also, before I stop, this is a tangent, but I did forget that I have a very small housekeeping issue that I would like to bring in front of your committee around the statute for weatherization. I would welcome the opportunity to walk you through that if you'd be willing.
Okay, is that what your remaining slide is about? Okay,
yes, that's right.
Okay, so let's be sure to go back to that. But Senator McDonald had a question, so let's, Senator McDonald.
In listening to your presentation, and particularly the last 2 minutes here, that well-coordinated proposals, comprehensive plan. I don't see that yet, but I see the witnesses saying that those things are absolutely necessary, but we haven't seen that yet. And I put a few thoughts to paper here. One, we're going to look at 60,000 additional homes. And for the last couple of decades, we've had a variety of contractors that we've trusted. They've experimented, they've worked on different things, and they've learned a lot. And what they've learned, we need to know what they've learned so that we do not do the wasteful things that didn't work. And that's going to require to establish some sort of inspection standards to see that what used to happen in some homes, whether it was mold or failure to let air go through or missing insulation, that those things don't happen. And I don't see in the plan here the way in which we're going to incorporate what we've already learned. We're going to inspect what goes on so that those that would do shoddy work because that's their business model are excluded from the process. I don't see that. And if we don't do a better job with the next 60,000 homes than we've done with the homes we've already weatherized, and the ones we've already weatherized were experiments in progress, and we're not criticizing what's already happened, but we damn well should be preventing having the things that we've seen go wrong in the past from happening again with new money. And I don't see that in the plan. And I was heartened to hear the witnesses say it has to be well coordinated and it has to be comprehensive. And it's not comprehensive yet, and it hasn't been coordinated yet, unless you can turn us loose on what the inspection process is going to be, who's going to conduct those, what's the remedy going to be when state money is spent and it's a South Carolina driveway sealer job. So I'll stop because I can keep going on, but we're the ones who have to sign off that this is a package, and hold you folks to also explaining the package that is yet to be explained.
Senator, I'd like the opportunity to respond to that. I certainly can't speak for the home performance contractor network that works with Efficiency Vermont. I think you'd have to talk with Efficiency Vermont around their quality control process. Every single home that we weatherize receives a quality control inspection by someone who is certified, nationally certified to do a QCI inspection, every single home. And that includes health and safety tests like backdraft and worst case scenarios. 10% of homes that are weatherized in the state of Vermont receive an audit specifically, randomly from our office, an in-home inspection from our office. Let me rest assured, and our providers would tell you they don't love this part, but if they don't do something right or they need to go back, we make them go back and do the work. And oftentimes they're doing that at their own expense. Sometimes they're doing it because our program, they failed to install a measure that would be appropriate, and we cover the cost of that, and they go back and do that. Sometimes they make mistakes and they have to go back and do that at their own expense. So we have one of the best, let me be very clear, I'm very proud of our program, but we have one of the best, the low-income weatherization program, quality control programs nationally. So I appreciate your point, because quality is what matters in terms of achieving energy savings and the greenhouse gas reductions that we want to make with these investments. And absolutely, we hold that as a high standard in our program. I think it's worth talking with Efficiency Vermont about ways that they do that currently and ways that that can continue to improve in that sector of the marketplace as well.
So, Mr. Chair, I'm heartened to hear this and look forward to hearing from the people who conduct these activities, and thank the witnesses for pointing out that they exist. And when we become privy to them, I will be much more enthusiastic that there's a comprehensive coordinated plan. Thank you.
So thank you for that. I have a question off. Ms. Lazorchak, did you want to respond to that at all, or if not asking you to, but I didn't want to cut you off. I have a question on another topic, and that it's well, not that new a topic. Still weatherization. So we're also in the middle of a housing crisis, right? And so for at least with priority housing projects, they've been required to build to the stretch energy code since at least, I think, 7 years ago. It might be since the inception. I'm not sure when that provision got added. But when you look at new construction, or does your work through the council entail looking at new construction and saying, okay, amongst the 60,000 new homes, how many thousand new homes will we build, and what's their energy performance, and to what degree are we going to rehome people in homes that from the get-go also meet these kinds of performance standards? Are we accounting for new home construction that will help towards the 60,000? Well, actually, it should be towards the GHG reductions, not towards the 60,000 additional homes.
Yeah, the climate action plan has a large component on speaking to the resilience of our communities around the necessity to build safe, energy efficient new homes and the capacity needed there in that space. But in the emission sector, I will actually say the plan does not highlight or focus a lot on the capacity and interest in new homes, largely because the pace at which new homes are being built is still at a relatively small scale. So the focus and emphasis in the emissions reduction space is all about weatherization of our existing home infrastructure. Appreciating that going forward, new homes should be energy efficient at a different standard than our older homes are. But yeah, the emphasis on emissions reductions is all in the weatherization of existing homes in that context.
Thank you. So Ms. Phillips, how about if we go back to your last slide?
Thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to bring this in front of you. We're calling this a technical fix, and so to the extent that you have a weatherization bill as a committee, we would like to ask that you consider including this technical fix. State statute defines what is our allowable cost per unit, or what we refer to as the job cost average. That job cost average is set in statute, but it actually changes from year to year based on inflation. And also statute allows us, our office, the authority to spend additional dollars to increase energy savings in home. And so there's some flexibility for us to do some additional work already in statute. During COVID in particular, this became an issue for us. Statute refers to using the consumer price index for inflationary increases. We actually saw material price increases in the construction industry in particular go way above what the CPI inflationary index would have us use. And so we would like greater flexibility in terms of accounting for inflation of materials and labor, but not necessarily tying that back to the CPI. Again, we feel like this is a technical fix because there's other aspects of the statute that allow us to make changes or make greater investments in energy savings. But just want to recognize that we actually aren't using the CPI to tie to inflation, and would just like to make that fix in statute. We think this is broadly supported by stakeholders around weatherization. We don't think it's controversial, but you're welcome to hear from others on that, obviously, and would ask that you consider making that change.
Thank you. And you sent that language to me, I think, previously. So I've already forwarded that to Ms. Schakowsky so that our next draft of the bill should include that language. Yeah, I had experience with $90 sheets of plywood last summer, and amazingly expensive materials. Do you happen to know if that kind of price pressure also went through to like heating appliances, furnaces, heat pumps? or they didn't experience that same sort of surge in pricing?
There's definitely been pressure across materials. The biggest one, as you pointed out, has been on things like plywood and other issues. I could certainly, ask our team to pull some of that information from Hancock and bring it back to you to just kind of show what other increases we're seeing across the board. It's something they look at more closely than I could probably speak to today.
No, that's okay. It's a curiosity question, not we don't need that data. So.
Sure, of course.
And somebody was showing the meeting by phone. So
yes. This is Maggie Gendron, Deputy Secretary of ANR. I apologize. I have water in my walls and the electrician cut my electricity off. So I apologize. I'm on the phone now.
No problem. We've been trained to inquire who's in the meeting. Glad to hear your electrician showed up. That's a
I don't feel like I'm the best person in this meeting anyway. I feel like you have two experts here. So, but I didn't want to. I hope that wasn't disrespectful for Paul. I wasn't anticipating having my electricity cut off so quickly.
No problem at all. Thanks. It was just thank you all for the discussion so far. I think I know that these proposals that are on the sheet that went around. So one to Secretary Gendron's concern about, are we talking about, or everyone's shared concern, we're not talking about pulling funds away from the programs we've already discussed in order to support other things. Can you help in any way? Can you recognize any of these programs and say, oh, well, actually, for instance, the training subsidies, perhaps through DOL or ACCD, are already incorporated into something that OEO is doing, or Efficiency Vermont is doing with the Performance Network? Or do any of these look familiar to you, or do they all seem like novel funding requests?
So I can say that the governors recommend around what you've listed here as training subsidies with the Department of Labor, that I have been in conversations with Director Buxton, Workforce Development Director Buxton, around how they would see deploying those funds and the opportunities to use them for weatherization. So I think there is some alignment there, and conversations with her as well around opportunities to develop apprenticeship and registered apprenticeships that would open up opportunities to leverage other funds in the weatherization field. And that would go beyond just our program potentially. So I can say I am aware of that one. I think that is very much in support of the work that's underway. I would have to defer more to Vermont Technical College around the training and career path programs, but I do know from speaking with the Associate Dean Maureen Hebert there that I think that's her last name, I apologize, around the work around career pathways. Again, that's work that will be really important for us in the weatherization field to really be able to clearly identify and define what those career pathways are. They definitely exist in terms of certifications and potentially with apprenticeships as well. And so I would definitely see working with them around continuing to define what that is. Again, that goes well beyond just our program, but those are the kind of conversations that we're having with VTC and Efficiency Vermont and some of the other partners, is how to, when I talk about coordination of workforce development efforts, that's very much in line with what I mean.
Okay, great. And happily, that box over in the notes column aligns with the governor's recommend. So that's always it's always good to see that note along with it. How about do you have experience with working with? So there's a program in here it's called Serve, Earn, and Learn. And it's got Forest Parks Recs, Resource, Vermont Works for Women, Vermont Conservation Corps, Audubon. Is that, do you all have a connection with any of those folks now in terms of doing your work, or would this be entirely novel?
I can't speak to the request for serve, earn, and learn specifically. I don't know what's entailed in that request, but to your question, two of those organizations that are involved in what I understand to be really just a collaboration between the 4 organizations around work that they already do. One would be Vermont Works for Women, and the other would be Resource. And both of those organizations have training programs where they are working to recruit and train underrepresented groups in the construction industry and in weatherization specifically. So absolutely, we collaborate with them. And I think there's an opportunity to tighten up, for instance, job placement for folks coming out of those programs directly into our providers. So we're in those conversations. And again, I go back to when I say we are working to try to coordinate these workforce development efforts. That's what I mean is like, how do we align? Like, you're going to train someone who is an opportunity youth that's 20 years old, is maybe interested in weatherization, and they go through Resources Youth Build program or their Weatherization 101. How could we then place that person who successfully completes that course right into a job with the low-income weatherization program, whatever provider is locally there? And then how do we ensure they have the wraparound supports to be successful? So that's the kind of work and coordination and collaboration that we're doing with those organizations right now. But I can't speak to the proposal specifically. I know they have other funding that they've received this year to do that work, and I know they are poised to expand as well. I know you heard from Vermont Adult Learning and their new Energy Works initiative that they launched in Rutland, I believe, with some funding from Department of Aging and Independent Living from what was Voc Rehab, I think now Higher Ability. We certainly helped fill some of Brock, the provider, weatherization provider there, helped fill some of the seats in that classroom with newly hired crew, right? So we took advantage of the fact that they were offering that training and partnered with them to do that. So, definitely these are organizations that we're working with, and we're looking to, strengthen what the ties are between the work they're doing and the work that's happening in our program.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't make, I looked away, and I know Ms. Lazorchuk, you had wanted to weigh in on that one.
No, but I do believe if you wanted to stick on that topic, that perhaps Deputy Secretary Gendron could speak to that program in particular.
The Earn, Serve, and Learn program?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't have anything to add. I have been seeing that particular program on the legislative calendar to testify in front of, I believe, Department of Education committee last week and this week.
Okay. Yeah, there's certainly a real crossover between, especially to the CTEs and career tech centers to help on the educational front. One more one I wanted to just sort of check your impression on is the very first item listed, statewide climate workforce recruitment and education campaign, which came out of their note there is was a top supported recommended investment by stakeholders. I need to double check by who that stakeholder group is. I don't know. But is that something that you're aware of, or that you say, oh, well, this would be helpful? Like the notion of a green building trades, whatever we call them, the clean energy economy. Is someone basically doing like marketing and branding work that helps people understand the opportunity, get drawn into see it, act on it, find programs that let them participate? Is that something that's happening now in a coordinated way, or it may be as kind of ad hoc as does your Career Technical Center have someone who's particularly knowledgeable and interested in that, and it comes down to an individual speaking to students in that center, and that's why that center does a lot of work and another one does very little. Any thoughts on that one? the need.
Well,
the need.
I can, yeah, that's the top recommendation in the climate action plan. It is spoken to in the cross-cutting solutions section, recognizing that having focusing in on climate workforce development and that as a concept cuts across not only helping us meet our emissions reductions, but also considering how we speak to our resilience and adaptation goals, as well as foster sequestration and carbon storage. That is a priority work group for the Energy Action Network. I know that I have been asked to join that. I believe Director Phillips is participating in that, or being asked to participate in that as well. And so that's an area of ongoing interest for us, and something that we'll be focusing on over the course of the next year through our participation in the EAN group.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's right. Our office does participate, not me personally, but in the EAN Workforce Development Group. I think some of these just require additional planning to understand how they complement or work in conjunction with what currently exists. So I would just sort of add that.
So the impression I'm coming away with is a lot of work going on. Some of the stuff, some of the questions I'm asking may be, the answers are in development, but maybe we're a year ahead of, like people can't yet say with confidence how we will do X, Y, or Z, because the underlying work is still being done to figure out exactly an answer to that question. Like X, Y, and Z workforce, for instance, has been developed as a needed resource, but the methods of developing it are still being figured out. So we're really interested in being helpful, but we are not sure how to be helpful.
I just want to say, I think that's exactly right. I think we know how to do weatherization. We know how to deploy that money right now to hit the ground running and start weatherizing more homes. Some of this work around workforce development and how it comes together as a comprehensive system to build that on-ramp to the superhighway, like that's work that's some good planning and coordination work that is definitely underway right now, both in the work that we're doing at OEO and then also the EAN Weatherization Workforce Committee. And I would think that next session we'd be well positioned to come back to you as a collaborative, as a not just me, Sarah at OEO, not just Director Lazarchuk, not just A&R, but sort of the field to come back and say, here's what we think this looks like together. So it's exciting to actually be a part of those conversations, and would invite members of this committee to the extent that you're able to join any of that work, would welcome that as well.
So I haven't kept most my EAN work group work was related to the weatherization work group, and I haven't kept track of the other ones, a little bit on clean heat. So is there an EAN based work-led, facilitated work group on workforce right now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. As in, for instance, we had Dylan Giambattista in and Representative Stebbins. So I think that is one and the same, right? The work group at EAN is the one they're talking about.
Yeah, that group has only recently launched. I just want to be clear. I think they're still finding, we participate on that work group as well. I think they're still finding what they're, yes, that is probably the same work group. It is recently organized.
Okay, thanks very much. Any other questions from members of the committee about either items on this list or any of the work we've already heard about? Senator McCormick.
Thanks. Stepping back, first of all, thank you for your testimony. Stepping back, where does this all put us relative to the long-term goals of the Climate Act? Of where we're supposed to be by 2050? Are we on pace? Does this put us on pace to those goals?
Well, as I stated earlier, I think that the $80 million going on the ground for weatherization is first and foremost the most important component of activating us to get on the right path to meeting first our 2025 and then our emissions reductions targets beyond that. The climate action plan, it looked to the weatherization at scale work group from EAN to pull in the recommendation that we spoke to in that space. And that work group speaks to the necessity to put to augment the private sector with $600 million in public funding between now and 2030 in order to ramp up and ultimately meet the objective of 90,000 additional homes between now and 2030. So that 80 million, first and foremost of ARPA dollars that we can deploy between now and 2026 is a signal that gets us on the right foot forward. But there'll be more work to do and a commitment to thinking about long-term funding in this space.
Thank you. That's all, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
So, Ms. Wojcik, can you say a little more? I think that figure that you decided, the 600 million, is one I haven't heard before. So we're talking about through 2026, the $45 million, that's, well, plus, as supplemented by the slide 2 that Ms. Phillips had. So it's more than just the 45. But can you spell out the anticipated private sector investment, by which I think we're talking about basically homeowners and commercial space owners investing in thermal on their own. And I suppose that would sweep up, well, I don't want to involve new home construction again. So can you just tell us about the 600?
Yeah, that's the number that's often cited between both the climate action plan and the weatherization at scale work group as the public commitment between now and 2030. That does not speak to the larger budget needed across both the private sector contributions and how much that comes from some of the other public funding that Sarah, Director Phillips, spoke to being augmented through federal funding and beyond. I would encourage you to invite in Neil Lunderville, who chaired that group, in order to speak through the details of the funding needed to advance the weatherization at scale recommendation that speaks to both public funding and private funding across that sector.
Mr. Chair, are there decision points that you're looking for us to make right now? I mean, I think that might be helpful to us.
Sure.
You know, are there certain things that you want us to be looking for and saying yes, no?
Yes. So I think part of what, I don't know that we come to a final conclusion today.
Sure.
But basically with this sort of expert group coming in.
I understand.
To get these proposals
Yep.
that are above and beyond the current government's recommend to say, which things can we recommend to the appropriations committee to make investments in?
Okay.
Exactly. But thanks for that.
Yeah. So we're hearing from folks, and then we will go through this list as a committee and say, yay, nay, kind of thing.
Exactly.
Okay, great.
Okay. So I think we're just a little bit over, but just wanted to double check, make sure that any members of the committee, so thanks for that helpful questions, Senator Campion. And if any members who are our guests today have any, having listened to the discussion unfold, if you have any thoughts you want to share with us before we conclude this segment. Okay, not seeing anything. Okay, thank you. Any committee last questions for our witnesses today? Okay, so seeing and hearing none, we're going to